You're listening to Inclusive AF with Jackye Clayton and Katie Van Horn.
Welcome to the Inclusive AF podcast.
That's Katie Van Horn.
And that's Jackye Clayton.
Boom.
Welcome.
I am so glad. Katie, having conversations with you is like the best part of my week every week.
That makes me happy. And I would say the same for you, mostly because I get some amazing, funny stories about your family.
Same.
Which we need to record more often. And then our animals.
I want to have an interview with every one of your brothers and sisters. Everyone.
I don't actually think you mean that.
I do. I don't think it would be fun for you. I think maybe when I come in town, maybe we can schedule something.
There you go. That sounds good.
Dinner.
It's great because one of my sisters and her husband's was listening in their car the other day. And they're like, it was like, oh, hey, we listened to one of your episodes. And it wasn't like, it was really good. It was, you guys sound a little tinny and you should really fix that.
Okay, maybe I don't. Maybe that's why you're like,
but here's the thing. We do it to each other all the time where it's not like, I won't even call it like being critical of each other. It's just, we are like very honest with each other. And so we do say things that maybe aren't delivered in the right way.
They might need to pray on that because this is.
Well, it also comes from, you just said praying. It comes from my good Catholic mother and the Catholic guilt that she likes to share with us. And so I think that has something to do with it too, where it's like the honest to a fault.
Got it.
And she is at times.
Well, I mean, the opposite is true too, because my mother is not like that. She was the exact opposite. Like I figured out that every day with me wasn't the best day of her life, like 10 years ago.
But while growing up,
I just thought it was. It was 2008. Yeah. Literally, I remember the day because I was like, my mom came to watch me do this bike ride in Lake Tahoe in May, and it was like 30 degrees, and she had to ride a boat, like all of these things. And she said to me, I was like, I am so sorry because I couldn't hang out with her because I was riding my bike. And she said to me, she looked me dead in the face, put both of her arms around me. She goes, this was the best weekend of my whole life. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. And I was like, oh, and it touched me and I started crying and I told someone, they were like, her wedding must have sucked. And then I was like, oh, wait, you don't think it was like the best weekend of her whole life?
But also I hate when people say that like the wedding was the best day of their lives. So I'm like, it's a party. Like it should be like our honeymoon was the best week of my life or whatever. I don't know. Like, I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
But still, I knew what he meant. Like she literally stood in the rain in 30 degrees and waited for you for an hour.
But she was out of the house. She was on a
12
boat.
Hours. Yeah, she had a boat.
I was gonna say, you're saying it as if like, oh, she had to ride a boat. She probably was like, this is fun. This is different than what I normally do every day. But I do like that your mom did that for you. Like that it was, you were
my whole life
princess.
And I have a brother and sister, all of us. I was always like that's why, like, one of the last things for those that are listening, so my mother has Parkinson's and dementia, and so she is not always really clear, even though she's really sweet. But one of the last things she said was, as I was to me, that was very clear, where I felt like she had a moment of clarity, and she was like, you have done such a good job with your children. And it just meant the world to me. I was like, I'm gonna keep telling her the same story every day to make her, maybe it'll trigger something. I'm lucky in that's what's triggered in my mom. Mm-hmm. Everything is like, wow, you're so pretty and you're so smart and you're so funny. And she's been like that my whole life. I'm so lucky. Unfortunately for my children, I did not inherit that gene. Should I pull my therapist in now?
Yeah.
And now we'll talk about
let's talk about why that is, Jackye.
Only if
session,
I can pop bubbles.
The therapy, no, you leave those alone. So Jackye, while we were prepping to jump on this call, was playing with bubble wrap, which I don't know if you know this, when you're on a Zoom call and it's not an ASMR video.
Not appropriate.
It's not so much, it's a lot to take on the other end. Yeah, I think my dad was like that as well, where we all kind of, joke around about like we were all his favorites. Like we each individually thought we were his favorite child. I'm pretty sure I was, but don't tell my siblings. But like that's just how he was. Like everything that you were doing was awesome. He wanted to be a part of it. And he was also like one of the most like soft-spoken, quiet, just kind of was there, very much the steady person in our lives, or like the constant in our lives. And so it was also really just awesome because he was the one that was like at every game and showed up for all the things. And he was just great because he would make you feel like you were the most important person. And he also had like the best sense of humor. I think that most of my siblings get our humor from him, but like somewhat dry-witted, and like we'll say things and people are like, wait, what? Did you really just say that?
Which is funny, awkward segue. It's probably why we're in this work, because we think what we have to say is so important. We have proof that us doing it, that we do have to share the message, even though.
That is true.
Because what are we talking about today, Katie?
So I wanted to talk about and kind of follow up on a conversation that we had with Tara Robertson when she was on the episode. And FYI, she's coming back in June.
Yes,
everyone relax.
Yeah, get off of us, man.
Everyone quit yelling at us. I'm just kidding. We are super excited to have her back. But one of the things that she talked about was just the fact that like, where should diversity, equity, and inclusion report to in an organization? And that kind of got us talking and started to kind of get us thinking about the fact that it's not just the where does it report to, but also like how is everyone else accountable to diversity, equity, and inclusion in an organization?
I think it's really hard. And I think the more I think about it, spoiler alert, I don't know if we know the answer.
I totally do. I'm ready.
Oh,
Jackye, I have my notes here. No. Well, I first want to, yes, I have thoughts, and I think there are different places it would work. What I think I get anxious about, like I just recently have heard from two different people. One was talking about a job posting that they saw that the DEI person was actually reporting into like the director, not even the VP, but like the director of talent acquisition. And I was like, interesting. I want to see how that goes. And then another is it was like a director level, but it was reporting into the VP of recruiting or TA.
Well, let's talk about those first, because let's talk about why that's what's positive there, and then why maybe that isn't the choice that we would make personally. Okay.
So the positive is recruiting is part of the work that needs to be done around DEI.
Yeah. It's good to make sure, that your jobs that you post are balanced equally.
Yes. Yeah. We want them to be gender inclusive and gender neutral, and also region specific with language.
Yeah.
Yep. But I also, what else? What's another good reason?
I think that's it. I think we've nailed it. That's really it.
So job postings, and we should say sourcing too, because sourcing is such a critical factor to getting more diverse pools of candidates.
So it can help with the attraction.
Yes.
And potentially help with the messaging on your job page, and help you to develop a policy, maybe a global company-wide diversity statement, maybe in theory, hopefully,
theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
And
allegedly.
And let's now talk about why maybe that isn't the best choice.
Because you have absolutely zero power or control over whether somebody or not makes the hire. And so being measured against an organization structure that culturally already is not valuing enough diverse voices is not fair. You can't hold me accountable when you've built this culture that isn't necessarily conducive to hiring diverse populations, and then say, why don't we hire more diverse people?
Right.
I think so. My answer would be another question. Why don't you fire all those misogynistic, sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic senior leadership that you have here? And then I would get fired. So that's a bad idea.
Yes. And using my improv skills here. I think I
Yes.
agree. Like, I think part of it is like, there is that line in the sand that needs to be drawn that you go, yeah, we're not going to deal with this anymore. You need to leave now. You're not living our values. You're not part of our culture that we want. But I would say, I like what you're saying on power, but I also would like to say budget.
Yes.
TA always has a fairly healthy budget if you look at all of HR, or has
But there's a
more.
place for all that money. It's not
Exactly.
even, you got job ads, the marketing, recruiting tools. None of that is bonus. None of it is like training. None of
No.
it doesn't go under to discovery and research. No.
Or like policy changes, things like that. Yeah, none of it. And so yeah, the budget, all of those things, that concerns me, just because if you don't have power, if you don't have budget, you're kind of dead in the water in doing this work. And there are things that you can achieve, as you already mentioned, like the job postings and some of those things, the careers page, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know that will make some impact, but probably not the most impact that you could achieve.
Well, and you know what I was thinking about today, and kind of thinking about what we were going to talk today, is it reminded me of internal audit. By the way, do I have a buzz in my voice? Because I hear a buzz in my ear. Do you hear it? Okay.
I don't, but my sister will.
Yeah, I'll tell your sister.
We're really sorry about that.
I'll tell her after we get to know each other better. I'll tell her what she can do with that. So what I was thinking about was with that is that it report, like internal audit reports to finance, even though it's overseeing all of the internal policies with all of the companies, because with the understanding that having bad policies impacts the bottom line budget. But I definitely don't think it should report to audit, even though I kind of wish that we could incorporate some of those policies into diversity work from internal audit.
Absolutely. And I think, again, so not reporting to TA. Another option is reporting to the CHRO or the Chief People Officer. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I would think that there would be a conflict of interest when you're talking about overseeing CHRO. Again, there are so many things that you have to worry about from that office. And I don't know if people who aren't in HR understand how much work. I mean, and I'm laughing to keep from crying when you're talking about wellness programs, overseeing FMLA, having insurance, the stuff that people take for granted at their companies literally take the most work. Making sure you have EAP systems and all of that takes so much work, and making sure you have the right one, and people just.
That's total rewards is one of those under the total rewards umbrella, where you have benefits, you have pay equity, you have all kinds of, compensation pieces. And that's the one that I'm always like, as a CHRO, like getting to know all of those pieces, because I mean, who wants to read through a benefits booklet? So every time you roll out a benefit, and I can't remember what they're called, actually, the benefits, what are they called? The benefits document. So basically, like, it explains in detail what will be covered, what won't be covered. And it's
the
like
one that you get in your mail in a
no. I'm talking about the one that the head of benefits gets.
Oh,
And that one's like 170 pages or some business like that.
The
and
one that and they send it to you, the 30-page document, which you promptly throw away and say, okay, I'm just going to trust you.
I'll talk to my HR person if something comes up.
It takes a year. Benefits, a revamp of benefits is a full-time person's job for a full year, and you can't turn it in on time. That's me on behalf of every benefits person across the world.
Right. And I think also the compensation piece, especially right now when people are trying to do pay equity, when they're trying to look at some of the data around that, like it is. I mean, it is painful. It is hard.
It would break a person. I think
Absolutely.
it would, if diversity and inclusion has to report to that person, I think it could literally break one of those two people.
Absolutely. And in doing that work in my, kind of generalist-ish role, I was a VP of the business partners first, and then moved over into engagement and inclusion. And so I was touching pretty much everything. And there was that, like, I wouldn't want to do this. Like, you couldn't pay me enough dollars to do like a pay it. Well, first of all, I couldn't do it. I don't think I could deal with all the spreadsheets. So like to
It
be
might
clear,
have nothing to do with any of
yeah,
it.
I had
but
put like
still.
a 0 in the wrong place and totally screw
decimal
everything
points
up.
and
Yeah.
numbers,
Yeah.
not
my jam.
my forte.
Not my jam. I can do like some of these 4 cells. That's about all I can do. That's what I'm good at.
I know how to make pivot tables.
Oh, I don't know how to do that even. So yeah, so now you're the comp person. Thank you. You just got
As long as there's no numbers in it, I can just create the equation.
Oh, I see.
Don't make me hit enter or else.
Who knows what might happen. Okay. So
No, I think that's too much. But then there's other departments to consider. I think we should talk about it, like marketing.
yeah. Okay. So the other option is to have the person to report into, I mean, I've seen finance, I've seen HR report into finance, and so have seen diversity report into finance. But honestly, I think the case that a lot of folks are trying to make, and you're seeing this a little bit with the chief diversity officer role, is folks are trying to figure out how do they actually get more, and I'm using the word power, but it's kind of the access to the C-suite. So having a chief diversity officer that's at the table with the other C-suite members is really helpful. And so let's go with that premise. But then from there, like, I think, why is that important? And it's not just budget, it's not just power. It's also the fact that when you talk about a true diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy and program and initiative, whatever you want to call it, every single department is touched.
Yes. And to go what you're talking about, in case someone's listening who's like, finance, why would you ever? Because not being diversified and equitable is a financial liability to your organization, and hiring people cost money. So you need to be able to look at all of those things. And if you don't do it right, you get sued. So it's like adjusting all those things to mitigate risk, which I know some people are like, why would it ever? It's because is the answer.
That's also why I think legal is so critical, is like, as you're updating policies, as you're updating different things, you have to make sure it's written correctly so that it is defensible, all of those things. And so making sure, and also like consistent with what you've done in the past, or, hey, we're going to start this new thing and we want it to be consistent moving forward. So there's those things.
And that's the next question. What about reporting to legal?
No, thank you. I love them all.
Is that a full no as I roll back to get more coffee?
That's a hard pass for me. Let me be clear. I have always loved partnering with legal because they just entertain me, and I just like bantering with them.
They're her
people. You can ask anyone that I've worked with in that capacity that has been my, legal advisor, in-house counsel. We always get along real well and have a good time. But going back to finance, it's also like, okay, so do you have stock, and how do you actually distribute stock and equity? How do you think about that? And so finance has to help with those things. And then it's also just like most companies now, as you're thinking about acquisitions, as you're thinking about your ESG programs or your, any different program, investors, people that might be buying you or people that you want to buy, you need to have culture, diversity, all those things kind of wrapped into what you're doing.
And if you're already diversified and your board is diversified, that's looked upon as an asset.
Absolutely.
Now people are looking to see that it's becoming a requirement in certain industries. So
no, in certain, like California, I think now we're at 2. You need to have 2 board members that are women on your board. And I think that is going to continue. Now we need to still work on other pieces of that conversation, but that's for another day.
Yep.
But I think the other piece is like, let's go down the list kind of departments in organizations so we can kind of stay under the finance umbrella. Procurement.
I was going to ask about procurement, which is great. It could be dicey. I think, if in procurement, a lot of people have gone through like a supply chain field. And so there's a great chance that the human part will be completely wiped out. As it is in most things in procurement. You're like, all I need is a pencil. Like, I don't care if you got it from like the antique wood jungle. We need pencils. Who's the cheapest?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I also think it's a great point, because I think that's, again, what investors, what other vendors, what a lot of, like, if any company is like regulated, those are questions that are being asked now. And so like my ask is always, hey, can you at least flip the switch in your program or whatever it might be, or ask whoever your procurement software is through, can you just track some of the information about, veteran owned, women owned, LGBTQ owned, all of the things that person of color owned. Although I think they call it minority owned, which that's a whole nother,
they do, which
again,
is
another conversation, but
yes, we're both like, oh, I'm starting to get the agina real bad. Can I take a break?
But like, I think a lot of companies aren't even tracking where are they spending money. And then you have the second.
The worst is when you don't look at stop. I'm so triggered that they don't, though, because they're called minority owned business, don't have those people in individual silos to see if they're making a great impact. And so many of them are not. It's like, here, I'll put it all in your name. And then now you're a, disabled veteran owned business with some guy who like sits in some office, doesn't even know he owns a whole freaking company, so that all these people can like,
Well, we know for years and years, you had wives of CEOs who had 51% ownership so that it could be a women-owned business.
And they could get those contracts.
Correct. But the first thing we need to do is just start tracking it. So I'm not even talking about, changing where you're spending it. But I think the other piece is for so many folks who've been in different industries for a long time, who might be leading procurement or are just taking orders from whoever in the C-suite is doing the purchasing. There's also we've always worked with Bob down the road. So we're just going to keep, instead of going, okay, we need an RFP for this, let's start actually figuring out, in the RFP, let's put some language in the RFP. Let's, ask the question of, are they any of these things, so that we can at least start thinking about this and looking at it. So again, I'm not saying change your entire process, but at least start to look at where are you today? Because I think that also is extremely eye-opening.
Fully. And for those who are not familiar, procurement is really dealing with purchasing and how organizations get their supplies in order to do the things that they do, whether it can be something, paper, pencils, staplers, computers. Where are they purchasing those things? And a lot of organizations have started to look for companies that were owned by underrepresented or people. That's kind of how that goes. So Absolutely. It's a firm no from me for procurement.
Well, no, I'm not saying reporting to, I'm just saying, like, how does DEI impact procurement? So I'm still saying we're still at the point
we're still at that point. Okay.
No, DEI is reporting to the CEO now and is at the table with their peers. And so procurement, how would that impact procurement? We just talked about that. How would that impact sales?
Well, fully, it's how you can, where you're going to sell, what industries, what areas that you have the ability to sell in, and how you can, it'll affect sales and the materials that you have.
Absolutely.
One of the things that was interesting, I taught a class to, when I was working with Planned Parenthood, and we were talking about that with fundraising. So in some organizations, it could be fundraising. It's like, how do we fundraise, and realizing some of the things that we had to deal with, the organization had to deal with as far as marketing to various groups that they didn't have under consideration in order to try to get those things. It was an eye-opening experience for me.
Absolutely. And I think also in sales, it's, how are we marketing a product, whatever that product might be? But it's also, and this one I think has come up, it's also leveraging people who are similar to who you are selling to. And so an example of that could be going in, like, I'm going to use cell phone sales, going into communities where people are Spanish is their first language, or whatever it might be. I'm using that as an example, and taking folks who speak Spanish to actually have those conversations about why this phone is better than that phone or whatever. But I think it's also, when you're in sales cycles, if it's a longer sales cycle, you're sitting, you're selling to a big organization or whatever, if you know who's going to be across the table during that conversation, have folks that are there that can speak to these topics and can actually help with the sales process, but also represent who's across the table from them. So there is a little bit of, okay, hey, I'm talking to other people that look like me, that have a similar background that I do, have, went to the same school, whatever it might be, some of those different things that I think we do already in sales. Like, if you have hey, this person went to Princeton and I also went to Princeton. Let me be the one speaking during this sales
Or
conversation.
I used to sell when I was in software sales for a short time. I sold to every place where you had an accent, like a Texas accent, even though.
Wait, you have an accent?
It was sometimes. Hold on, let me do a shot. I'll have one by the end of the hour. But yeah, I was like, I have a Texas accent and I had to sell to Mississippi, Alabama. And I was like, they all know this is not Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, that this is a Texas accent.
Right.
And I got called out. My boss was listening to me talk and the guy goes, are you from Texas? And I was calling into Tennessee. And I literally went over the cube and said, told you.
They know.
Sorry, I digress.
They know.
But I also think it's good to talk about, give plans. When you have a diverse population of a diverse sales team, it helps give different ideas about how you sell things and what audiences, and kind of look at it internally more. I think you can share better ideas. And that's what's so great about diversity. That's a great example of having different minds at the table that think differently, that do things differently, that have different backgrounds, that can see even what a tool is used for. That you're selling. How do we position it in these, and we can try all these different ways. So,
well, and it's also getting, I think every person in a sales role gets feedback from clients of, if you had this feature, if you had this, then we'd buy it. And so you also get to hear some of that stuff and get those different ideas. And so having someone at the table that can say, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. And here's why. I'm going to say my people, that's okay. Not inappropriate, but like for the group that you're selling to, or for the folks that you're trying to attract. Okay. Where else can we go? Marketing and comms. Yeah. Do we want to, we'll bundle those together for the sake of this conversation.
I used to not like it. I think you're the one who actually was like, no, I don't hate it. We had this conversation before. Don't hate it. I think it's really important when you think about it from this perspective. Like, when you do something positive and you want to be able to share it with the world, and especially if you have a misunderstanding, you really rely on the marketing team in order to share that message. And they are the face of your company everywhere it is. And so they need to be able to have the language, the wording, all of those things need to work together, and they have the money. I don't know if people know how much marketing gets a lot more money than a lot of the other organizations, because they can tie it back to a lead, to a company, to a sale, like you can track that.
Absolutely. And I think for me, marketing, it's also, again, product positioning and kind of who is our market, who are we trying to sell to, and how do we expand that? How do we grow that? All of those things. But then it's also consistent messaging. So it's not,
from a reporting standpoint, is great to have the tools and resources that they have in marketing.
Absolutely. Because I think there are, like you're saying, like, you have your customer segments that you can go, okay, here's how we're going to talk about it here. Here's how we're going to talk about it there. But there's also just like the deep knowledge of the customers. And then also from there deciding, what needs to change, what needs to be better. But I think there's
internal conversations as well.
Yes, that's what I was just going to say. But it's also like how are they, and how it's, the internal comms team talking to the people that are in the organization, working with TA and whoever else might be doing recruiting and trying to bring in new talent. And then the third is like, how are they talking externally? So the example I give is, we know most C-suite level executives aren't running their own Twitter, aren't running their own LinkedIn. Like they're getting blog posts, they're getting content, they're getting different things that someone on their team wrote that they're putting in their name, or that they're saying from this company. And then, the CEO blasts it out because they have a lot of times a broader range of folks that they're speaking to, interacting with, whatever. And so I think there's also that someone on the marketing team is supporting each one of those C-suite members, knows their voice, and knows how to say the right thing at the right time in this certain way for John or for Sally.
I want to expand on that. You're right. One of the things that's really needs to be clear, and I think I've been starting to talk about it more lately than before, about how you can be passionate about an item, but not be an expert about an item. And one of the reasons why it is important to to have a marketing ear, and if you don't utilize marketing in your DEI at your organizations, if you have one, why you should tap into that is because they have a clear marketing schedule. So they know what's going out. So they know what the impact is going to be internally that you might not know, that we're about to do a major acquisition. Maybe today's not a good time to start telling everybody that they're bad people. Maybe we should just wait just a little, or maybe if you frame it in this reference, like, how can I get the ear of the right people? And they say, if you frame it in this way, you will get their attention, because this is what's the next big thing. And the timing to know when the budgets are going in, when they are making purchases, when those things are, when you can just tag on to some other messages, it'll be a lot helpful. Then you won't be standing alone. You'll be standing with other people in your organization if you have that information.
And hopefully, I mean, we've seen so many failures at this, but hopefully someone on your marketing team is also the voice of reason when folks are trying to be like, oh, we should do this promotion, or we should say these certain things publicly. And you're like, no, never, ever say those words ever in your head.
Yeah, like public. Who did this?
Yes. And so I think, I mean, we've seen so many of those recently where we're like, who approved this?
Yeah.
I mean, we just talked about Basecamp, you know, in one of our last episodes. And so that one is a great one of like, who in marketing and comms didn't go, okay, let's think about this for just a minute. And maybe they did. And obviously he was the CEO and is an outspoken person. So sure. But I think you have to have that voice of reason that also says, hey, Miss CEO, let's pause on this for a moment. And let's think about the implications. Like, I've said this to you a million times, like HR has to think not what this policy, practice, procedure, whatever will happen. It's what could happen. That's the worst case scenario. What could happen 5 steps down the road? And that's PR, that's marketing, that's comms to me. And
I will tell you a true story about that happened to me in my company. I don't think they'll mind.
I want a fake story first, please.
A fake story first. Okay. So I was walking in the woods, this freaking wolf out of nowhere. Okay. Just kidding. But literally at Seek Out. So when we closed our Series B and we were so excited, we grew in our organization. We post the press release and it's our founders, right? And one of the investors like jumping in the air. And I think it was like 5 people like from Indian descent, and a white guy, and people were like, oh my God, like really see the diversity, like, and had all this attitude, and we're being so rude about it publicly, just being rude about that in regards to our product, even though everybody at the organization was like, we don't get it because we know these people, we know the mindset, we know what they're leading. And yeah, they were friends, like every startup on the planet, a bunch of friends getting together to build this tool. But we learned, I mean, nobody asked me. I didn't think of it, but it's like, I thought of it when I saw it, because it's like they all have jeans and they're all from Seattle and they look like they're from Seattle in the picture. They all look.
What does looking like Seattle? Hipster or lumberjack or
sweater? It's kind of a cross between JC Penney, like, and
LL Bean.
Yeah.
LL Bean. LL Bean. Yeah.
Fully.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's a great point. No offense, LL Bean.
We love LL Bean.
We love all the L's and the beans. Pinto,
let's talk about
Black
LL
beans.
Bean. If you want to be our sponsor, we're open.
We'll be willing to cut that out. No, but fully. So it was like, I understand that's what it's looking like. Like maybe we should have thought that through if it came back from like, what is this going to happen from a PR standpoint, where we should be saying instead we're building and growing. And what was funny is as soon as I saw it, because me being the DEI strategist, right? Anything attached to diversity will come on my desk at some point.
Absolutely.
And the good bad news was the founders looked at it and they said, oh yeah, we totally earned that. Like they were just like, yep, didn't think that one through a
little bit. Yeah.
Like, dang, yep, they're right. Like we can't even be mad about that.
Right.
So we learned an important lesson there. But I think other people don't think about that, how much that's one. It didn't talk about any of the other things that we've done or our volunteer efforts or our corporate responsibility. All it said was like, oh, great, look at this startup from Seattle.
Right.
And in other organizations that are bigger, if diversity doesn't play a part, there's stuff that's absolutely devastating to your career. Like
Right.
you will still get the blame for it if diversity is in your title, that you let this happen.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, again, I think there's just this piece that we have to be thoughtful about of putting that lens to everything we do. Because it's also, I mean, and we've talked about this a little bit, like in your careers page, don't get some stock photos of like, you know, one white person, one black person, one, you know, someone of Asian descent, like, don't do that where you basically try to make a Benetton ad. Like it doesn't,
Like,
that just
stop.
doesn't resonate and it looks super weird. But I also think there's the, like, be realistic. So like that picture, I get it. You got heat for it, but I also am like, but it was real.
It
and
was
so
real.
that's also like the piece that it's more like, okay, that's really who we are. So there's that balance that you have to strike also between who we really are and where we want to go, or, you know, how we want to consider some of the stuff. So that's also in the messaging of like, here's this picture. And how do you think about that kind of, you know, how that's going to show up?
Yes.
Engineering and IT. How does DEI show up in engineering and IT?
Girl.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, please. Too close.
So data security would be my first one. Just because I think, you know,
good one.
Folks don't think about the fact that, you know, the source of all truth, someone in IT actually owns that. And yes, there can be HCMs or, you know, ATSs and all these things that different departments, i.e. HR, are using. But when you think about your customers, your vendors, all of these, the data that you're taking in, especially if you're asking some of these questions, needs to be kept confidential. And there also needs to be audits of who has access. Because you and I have talked about the fact that, like, in recruiting, whoever can see demographic data of candidates cannot be part of the hiring decision, period. They can get aggregate reports after the fact, but they should not know that so-and-so that applied is clicking these 3 boxes or whatever. Now they're going to probably see a visual when the person walks in the door. Okay, they're a female, they're whatever. But I think it's just really data. Data needs to be protected. You did that.
I'm glad that you brought that up. I was thinking of it from a different space, and where I went and why I was like, girl, is because I am the bearer of great news always to engineering organizations. When I'm like, hey, this isn't ADA compliant. You literally have to redo complete sites. Like, for an example, you have a site and you sell widgets, and you have pictures of all the widgets that people can order, but you don't have any script on the back end, so that if somebody is visually impaired, you have to go back and enter in every single tag, every explanation for it to be compliant. And or the colors of all these things, or the other pieces where it does become important. At first, you might not think about it as diversity being there, but someone has to check and monitor that it's accessible by everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that's a hugely valid point, because I also think that happens with, you know, I mean, you can talk about QA underneath, which is doing testing of those very things. Like, should the button be blue or green or black so that it's more, you know, able to be seen visually or whatever it might be. So just being thoughtful about some of that stuff. And then I think there's also the, obviously, and this is, I'm not making an assumption, but I am going to state something that is a little bit of an assumption. So in most organizations, I don't know, I'm like, I'm trying to defend,
I'm totally going to.
Yeah, I'm trying to defend my statement, which I shouldn't, but most organizations that we are familiar with, one of the places that they lack diversity is in engineering.
Fully.
And so acknowledging that, and then realizing that, like, your team as the engineering team is going to be hand in hand with TA going, how do we do this differently, better, whatever it might be. And all of the things that go with that, you know, hey, are your engineering teams talking about what you're doing around diversity? So that if someone sees them on LinkedIn, they're going to go, oh, wow, this might be actually a place that I can be myself and I can do great work and all of those things. And so I think there's the reason why I wanted to have this conversation is just because I think so many times it is kind of, it falls at HR's feet.
And it's like, so not, I mean, it's like not even the whole, they could do it perfect. can completely still fall apart.
Absolutely. Well, and it's also like it's the support of, like if we're rolling out a new policy around talent reviews, every leader in the org needs to be on board to say, yeah, this is why we're doing this differently. We're trying to block bias, or we're trying to do whatever we're doing. And I think there's just a little bit of a miss there. And I know I don't think it's an intentional miss. It's just again, the lens I'm looking through, the lens you're looking through is DEI. And not everyone else is doing that. And like you said, you're looking at pictures, you're looking at everything that might impact DEI or the DEI messaging.
Yes.
And how does that impact the company? And it's the same thing for me. Like it's how will this policy, how will this procedure, how will tracking some of these things, how will looking at some of this stuff impact the org? And, I think it's so positive. Like when you have a procurement team that's tracking that information and can share that with a prospective investor, they're like, oh, wow, you guys are like doing the things that we're going to be asking about. And more companies are asking for this information. If they're going to partner with you, if they're going to buy from you, if they're going to whatever the thing might be, they want to know, what is your company makeup? What are you doing around these different topics? How are you handling some of these things? So everyone needs to know. Sales needs to know, what are we doing around diversity and inclusion, so they can talk about it if the question is asked. So
I think that's great. And also it's funny because in my area, my specialty, people will say, well, are you afraid, like, oh, your product is going to introduce bias? And it's like, oh, honey, if you think the bias lays in the database, let me tell you what's in the office. Right. Like you, this is a scarier piece. And there are so many things. Well, we should continue talking about it because there's so many things where diversity goes into. That's why I'm getting the agita real bad. I'm getting cramps because it's like all of these. Have we gone through all the departments yet? Because I'm starting to twitch. My eyes starting to twitch.
I think pretty much. I'm sure there's other ones that if you're talking about like I'm talking mostly about for-profit. So in nonprofit, there's other things that you would need to think about. But just sticking with for-profit for this conversation, so you stop twitching. I think it's good. I'm trying to save you today on this beautiful Sunday. I don't want you to be twitching the rest of the Sunday that you have. But yeah, I mean, I think it is just like, how can we really help to educate all the teams? And so like this conversation, I hope that each person that hears this steps back and looks at their org and the departments within their org and who is in the C-suite, that you can go, okay, for this, hey, for the chief revenue officer, here's what they're going to care about. For, the CIO, CTO, what are they going to care about? All of those things. And so just starting to like really dig in for your own org to say, why will this matter to them, or what impact will this have on them? Because it is a shared work. It's not just HR pushing things out and everyone going, oh, great, another thing from HR. Everyone needs to be committed. And yeah, I think we could talk about this for 4 more hours, because I think it is one of those things that there's so much to it and so many layers to it that folks haven't thought of or hadn't, and so it is just like, oh, HR will take care of it. Like, we don't need to worry about that. And let me be clear, HR does have a huge role in this. I mean, there's like
at the bottom of this, there's our people.
Yes. Employee life cycle. Yeah. How are you sourcing? How are you onboarding? How are you providing development? How are you giving them career paths and career opportunities? How are you looking at their pay and their compensation? How are you, like, all of the things that would impact an employee need to be part of this conversation as well. But within that, it is, okay, so I don't know if I've told you this story. I might have told you this story before, but I'm going to share it again.
Oh,
so
good.
As part of calibration session, so this is where you do the talent reviews and the leaders rate their teams, but then you usually come together as a leadership team within each level, if you will, to talk about the level 1s, 2s, and 3s during this meeting, or the level 4s and 5s in this meeting, or whatever it might be. So you're calibrating against your peers. How did they rate folks? Okay. And as part of that, you are hopefully telling them a little bit about, how should you write your review to make sure you're not using language that is discriminatory or biased or whatever. So that it's the whole thing of like, in reviews, women get called aggressive and not good at communication or not a team player, and men get called, what's the word? Like they're doing a good job because they are like pushing and they're,
I know what you're talking
what I'm
about.
thinking of. Anyways, so like things like that. But then it's also when you're in those calibration sessions, it's fascinating to watch the peer group of leaders start to dig in on, well, why did you rate this person as an X or as a Y or whatever? And then starting to see it also on the full picture. So when you, like, I'm going to use the 9-box because that's one of my favorite tools is the 9-box, and looking at that and then laying out, okay, everyone that is a level 1 engineer in this organization, here's how they were rated. And then you start digging in on the demographics of each one of those 9 boxes. And you start to see some trends that you're like, ooh, okay, let's talk about that some more. There's no women in the 9-box. So in the highest rating that they can have. Why is that? Let's talk about it. Let's think about that, whatever it might be. Or there's no person of color that's on any of the, 6, 7, 8, or 9 box. So that, top 4 boxes that it could be. Why is that? Stuff like that you're helping just to have a calibration session. When you start to have the leaders check each other and like correct each other on how they're talking about their team members, how they're rating their team members, all of those things, you're literally, and I can remember this day sitting in a room and I was like, oh my God, they get it. They have heard us and they're doing the thing that we have asked them to do. And that now has happened multiple times in these conversations with different companies where they're having these calibration sessions and they're like, oh, well, we talked about this. We made sure, like someone said aggressive about, this one woman, and we just told them maybe that's not the right language to use. And you're like, oh my God, you get a gold star. You've grown up, you've graduated. But like, honest, like I'm joking, but it is like, honestly, like that's when you go, holy shit, they get it. They get it and they're doing it. And now, there's, again, that's not the end. There's still more work to be done, but it's stuff like that you're like, hey, engineering leads, you all heard me and you're starting to do this. And this will change the course of people's careers. That's what we're also trying to do. Like, how are we thinking about people's lives and careers? Because it is people. It all goes back to people. How are you helping them? How are you hindering them in their progress?
I feel like it's amazing. Like I will, and I use my company as an example within,
the world.
I don't try to disclose everything because I no. My job. I got 2 babies in college. I need to get my foundation done. That's very expensive. But the other day, one of our engineering like suggested an article and it was about hiring and diversity. And I'm like, what? This is so great. And
it makes you a little like, your heart
listening to me.
My heart.
I report to the CEO and I dotted line to every single group. But what I found at first was I was like, okay, this is going to be rough. Right. But what I've found, and part of this is through building relationships, is that it actually works to have a dotted line because I have an ally in every single group because I'm sharing, like, this is the various sentiment. These are the things that we need to consider. Do you agree with that? And then I, as well as them, have an ear to the CEO of the company. So we're not doing it apart. And so I can say, okay, I hope maybe my CEO won't be listening, but maybe, if it's something I can say, hey, head of, customer success, this is something that I need. I can tack some of those needs onto those groups because it's going to benefit those pieces of the organization. Like, is there what are you working on right now? And can I piggyback on that? Like, are you considering utilizing an LMS that I can utilize for this? Are you considering taking notes that I can utilize for our interview process? Like, trying to connect all of those pieces together. And I think that's important because the work is so hard. And some days you feel like you're all by yourself, to try to create these relationships and have, even if you don't report today to the executive level, you need to try to analyze those relationships to see where the barriers are going to be that can get in your way, and submit it to your person. And if they don't respond, you just keep going up until someone says, I hear you, I see this.
Right.
Of where you think because the barrier sometimes is your boss.
Right.
but make sure and see where the relationships in all of the different departments that we just talked about, because you can add to all of those organizations as well to make sure that you're reaching those goals and that you can look at it through a DEI lens. I think every department would benefit from it. And it would just help you sleep at night knowing that people are still working on that. But then you're also sharing, this is not just about, Black and brown people and women, that this is about a bigger picture. And in order for us to be successful, we all need to be working on this, even if you're the only person with diversity next to your name on your business card.
Awesome. And amen. So,
and whoop, whoop, and hallelujah.
Yes. Happy Sunday. Jacqueline, what is your one lesson? What is one thing you want to make sure people take away from this conversation?
I think it would be going back to that. Don't take it alone. Don't do it alone. Find people that can support you in those various groups and try to leverage your relationships into what you're needing. But also, you will be able to get your job done no matter who you report to. Just be aware and get a clear understanding of what you need to do. Was this 2 things, 3 things? What you need to do if you feel like you're unable to meet your goals as a DEI leader.
Absolutely. My one thing is, something I said a little bit earlier of, we kind of just ran through some departments, but sit down and think about who your C-suite is and like what departments you have in your organization and how each one of them will be impacted and can impact DEI in your organization. So make it real for your team and your organization, and then have a conversation with the CEO, with the C-suite about here's how this will impact you and what help I need and what support I need. If you are in this role, and if you're not, and you're just in HR and you're like, hey, start talking to folks about like, how else does this impact each department to make sure everyone gets that we're all accountable. We all have a part in this. And then also, if you don't follow Jackye on social media, you should, because she just posted some adorable photos of her son who just went to prom last night and is the cutest thing ever.
And if you haven't hung up yet, or you're still watching, you haven't turned it off yet, if there's a topic you'd like for us to talk about, let us know. And also, we'd love it if you would give us a rating online. If you're, if you're still listening, you owe it to all of us to rate our podcast. So we can make content that's valuable to you.
Absolutely. So I think, reach out. We're on a lot of different social medias. I know we have folks that are chatting with us online, but also, if you want to, you can shoot us an email. We do have an email as well that we have set up. So it's info@inclusiveafpodcast.com. And, shoot us a note. Let us know how we're doing, what you'd like to see. If you'd like to be a guest, feel free to reach out. Again, that's info@inclusiveafpodcast.com. All right. Signing off for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Katie Van Horn.
And this is Jackye Clayton. Bye.